All right, fig lovers. Today we're talking about hardy fig trees. What varieties are the hardiest? Well, I think I have a pretty good representation of exactly that here in this yard this year. I'm in the Philadelphia area. It's zone 7A, and fig trees are about hardy to zone 7A without protection. So we've got a pretty good trial this past winter. We got down to 4, 5, and 6 and 7 degrees Fahrenheit on 4 different nights. For 3 of the nights, it was 4, 5, and 6, and then it actually didn't really warm up during the day above 20 all that much. So that's pretty extreme for fig trees. I think a lot of the experts, including myself, would say fig trees are hardy to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's very few varieties, probably the most hardy of them. 5 degrees is a much more safer temperature for hardier varieties, and 10 degrees, I would argue, is a really safe temperature for the majority, if not most of all of the varieties in existence. So that's the wood that we're talking about. The roots are actually only hardy to about 15. You could probably get away with going down to 10, but the roots are underground, so they're much more insulated than if it was 0 degrees here at night. The roots are probably going to be much warmer than that, and so we don't have to really worry about them. In colder zones, you do have to actually insulate the soil. That's why we got a lot of wood chips down. We usually cover the base of every single tree with at least some kind of mulching material. I've seen people use concrete blankets, all kinds of things, housing insulation, all in an effort just to keep the roots warm. Because even if the wood dies, a fig tree will always come back from the roots if they're warm enough throughout the winter. So you can grow fig trees even down to zone 4 and 5. Not that I'd recommend planting them in zone 4 and 5 in the ground, but definitely in zone 6, you can get away with it if you give them adequate winter protection. Now, if you're curious about how to protect your fig trees, I've talked a lot about this on the blog, my blog, figboss.com. I've talked about the exact strategies that I would use if I was growing them in zones 5 and 6 in the ground, how I would protect them. I'll put a link to that in the description. Also, it's not just about the varieties that you choose. We're going to look at that today. We're going to look at the different varieties around the yard and see how they fared. Because now actually some of them are waking up. The buds are breaking. It's the middle of April here in the Philadelphia area. And so we see a lot of damage, especially here in the southern plot. We're going to go over that really quickly. But then I want to show you guys the trees that look pretty much untouched, like nothing even happened. So it's important not just to choose the right variety, but lignification is so important. It's more important, I think, than the variety, because even if you had the most hardy fig variety in existence, if the tree is not lignified that well going into the winter, it's not going to withstand the cold. I've talked so much about this. There's an article I've written on my blog. I'll put a link to that in the description. There's also 3 videos I think I published very recently. If you just go to my recent videos, I'll put a link to all 3 of those, where it talks about how to make your fig tree more hardy. And it's true. Your fig variety, as hardy as it can be, will never reach its genetic potential without being lignified as much as possible going into the winter. The pruning that you do the prior year and the winter protection that you give it the prior year has a huge impact on how much it grows and how far into the season it grows to actually lignify properly. So I'll give you one quick example because I'm not going to touch on it much, but this right here is a Celeste tree. It's called Texas Peach, just has a fancy name. But this tree here, last year, you could see the growth only grew about a foot. A foot, that's it. It fruited last year on these branches. Whereas other trees I have, if they get hit by the cold really hard, like the majority of them here in this southern plot did, they're going to grow like 7 to 10, maybe even 15 feet. You got 1 foot versus 15 feet. So you cannot have a tree be ready for the cold if it grows 15 feet. The main message there is just to protect every single tree for at least 1 to 2 seasons. Sometimes you may even need 3 depending on the variety. And then once you do that, it should be as hardy as it's gonna get. So this southern plot, we actually have about 60 fig trees planted here. We got another one here on the east. This is a very young plot that we pretty much just planted in the last couple of years. This plot's been here, I think, for like 7 or 8 or something. Some of the trees in here that are the oldest. We've got a western plot over there by the pears behind it. And then we also have another western plot on the other side of the house. That plot has done the best historically. And then there's a plot in the north. So we have different microclimates. The plot on the north has a drier soil. Typically the trees grow less there and they should lignify better there. And that's where I've deemed a hardiness experiment. So we're gonna look at that plot and see the differences. This one here has always done the worst. And I even have varieties that are supposed to be really hardy. Like this is Celeste, but my Celeste tree has taken some damage. There isn't a lot. And what I mean by damage, we're gonna look at on these trees. I've already made some cuts on some of them just so I can cut away all the growth that was dead. If you have dead growth on your tree, you might as well cut it away. Now, it's a good idea to wait until your trees wake up, because lower down here on these branches, you just won't really know exactly what's alive until it starts to flush out that growth. You don't want to cut away anything that is dead, or alive, excuse me. So you got to be careful and you got to know what you're looking at. But generally the branches that are maroon, this is some growth that I already cut away. If it's maroon or red in color, it's dead. It's desiccated, and you can see how it snaps like that. The growth is done. Whereas if you have growth, and this is just a really easy way to tell, if you have growth that bends and doesn't snap, it usually has some water content left in it, and it's probably alive. You can also do the scratch test. Just scratch away some bark. If it's green underneath there, you're good, but that's usually misleading, because just because a tree leaves out, or just because it has some green up here, doesn't mean it didn't take some damage actually lower down on the branch. So lower down on that trunk that it was attached to, you could have damage here, which kills the cambium enough down here that then, even though this might leaf out in the spring, about a month later, the whole thing could die back to a lower point. So you don't really know 100%. Even though I'm doing this video now, I think I've been able to identify what trees should have damage on them and which ones don't, and where we're at generally with them. But as I said, you know, just because we're in the southern plot, because I've planted hardier varieties, like this one here is hardy Chicago, but look at all this red wood up here that's dead. All of the growth from last year is dead. And in fact, even the 2-year-old wood that we protected for one season is partly dead. So there's something, I think, going on in this plot. Hardy Chicago, Celeste taking some damage. Hardy Chicago took more damage than this Texas peach did. Actually, there's some dead wood. You can see that there on the Celeste. So I have a feeling, this is my hunch, but we're gonna find out for sure. I got some soil tests. I ordered some through Penn State, and I'm gonna take some soil samples here in this southern plot, because I think we're missing something. I think we're missing boron potentially that helps lignify these trees, or even potassium. I've heard a lot of other growers tell me about potassium. You look it up on the internet, you'll find that if you're missing certain nutrients, it's just not good for your trees and lignification. So I'm gonna find out. We're gonna see if we're missing anything. You would think with all the mulch and compost I've put on this soil over the years that I wouldn't be missing anything. But hey, you never know. It's weird to me that this plot just never has gotten its act together, and there's almost no tree in this plot that really has performed well. Regardless of the variety, the only one that did really well is LSU Purple. This LSU Purple has no damage on it whatsoever. That's incredible. And it's a child of Celeste. So if Celeste does well and LSU Purple inherits a similar hardiness, you would think LSU Purple would also have a similar hardiness, but in this particular situation, it's done even better. On this side of the property, this is the newer plot here, the trees we have on the east side. I don't really have a whole lot of data just yet on these varieties, because you have to protect them for at least 1 or 2 seasons. Most of them in here I've already protected for 1. You can see the older wood back here, this silver and gray color, versus the wood that's a bit older is brown, or younger, excuse me, is brown. So anything you see that's silver or gray, we've already protected it for 1 year. Like this hunt tree here has a trunk that's silver or gray. But if you look higher up on the hunt tree, there's actually not a ton, it's very minimal up here, of winter damage. You can see this branch looks pretty good as well, although there is some, the tips up here took some damage. And you normally will see damage higher up on the tree because that's where the trees are less lignified. The further down you go, the more time the tree has had to lignify. So you would assume just by that, lignification matters and is a big factor in all of this. But I would say Hunt looks pretty darn good compared to a lot of other trees, especially in this plot. If it has growth from last year that has survived, that's very, very good for it producing earlier and higher quantities and at a higher quality. Remember that. One of the trees in here that also is pretty good is Vagabond. You can see Vagabond here is actually starting to leaf out. That's really impressive. We're at the middle of April, and this tree is already getting its act together and is leafing out. So to me, it even, I think this variety produces Breba, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it did produce some Breba last year. So I think we may even get some Breba off of this tree. That would be insane, because there's another debate. I know we're talking a lot, but I'm trying to show you guys, trying to get all the points out as we show the trees. But there's a debate about the hardiness rating of the Breba buds. Are the Breba buds less hardy than the wood itself? Some people would argue it is, but I don't think that's true. I think the branch itself has a very, very similar, if not maybe it's slightly higher, slightly better in hardiness than the Breba bud itself. But I think they're almost identical, if not the same. So if your tree is hardy, like Vagabond is back here, then it should be able to not only, actually, yeah, right here, the Brebas are swelling. It should not only survive the winter, but it also should produce Breba as well, which is incredible. That was one of the best things about last season. Now, it does have some winter damage. Does it? No, the tree looks pretty much spotless. So yeah, the tree is perfect. That's incredible. I thought there would be at least a little bit of damage on this. Maybe a very minimal amounts of damage. So that means Vagabond's one of the hardiest trees I have, and there's over 100 different varieties I've been testing now in the ground here. One of the other trees that I think is exceptionally hardy, and probably more hardy than Vagabond, is this one here. It's called Camuna Small Black. It has a long history. We've been trying to trace back the records and find out exactly what it is. It actually goes by the name Valcamonica long green or small green. I can't remember if it's small green. I think it's small green. So the name eventually got messed up when it was imported into the United States. But Valcamonica is a valley in northern Italy that is rather cold. And there was 3 varieties that came from that valley into the United States, and this is one of them. It is an exceptional variety for hardiness. And you could tell I have a number of trees now in the ground, and they look spotless. Actually, there's another one back here that has taken no damage as well. It's leafing out, so that's exactly what you look for. If it's leafing out at this point, it's going to fruit probably by the 1st of August. The trees that got whacked back like this, all the way, if you lost all the growth from last year, all the 1-year-old wood is gone from the cold. those trees are going to be delayed with their main crop potentially a whole month. So instead of seeing them on August 1st, but the earliest date, I may not see them until September 1st. It may even take 2 months for me to see them if they fruit at all. Certain varieties, if I lose all the 1-year-old growth, they will not fruit. This plot historically has not done well for me either in terms of hardiness. Not only that, but the trees in here, in the middle row, there's 3 rows, the soil is very dry because it was all peat moss, and it was a huge mistake when I first started. But there is some trees in here that look pretty good. This was a really, what I was going to be expecting was a good Campaniere for this year. And I thought it would get through this winter and do well, but it is toasted. Pretty much the whole tree, all the growth from last year. And there may even be some damage down here at the base, and maybe that's kind of where the source of the issue is. But this does look good. The 2-year-old wood, the 3-year-old wood looks good, maybe about here. So all the 2-year-old wood and 1-year-old wood is dead on this tree. Now, that's important to note because we're going to look at some Campaniere that look great. So it just goes to show you again, with Hardy Chicago, just because one Hardy Chicago or one Campaniere isn't doing well, it doesn't mean that it won't do well if you just put it in a different spot. You know, here's all the wood here as proof. It's brown, maroon. It's kind of a bummer. One of the trees that does look good here, I think it's worth noting, is this fig here. It's called Constance. This is a fig. It's kind of like, I think it's related to Celeste. I would be shocked if it wasn't. And I think we're going to find out more about it because it really does remind me a lot of Celeste when I eat it. But the figs look rather different. Celeste had to have come from somewhere. People think, oh, it's an American fig. It's not. I do think Celeste came from France, and where this fig is found. And this is a really popular variety in the southwest of France. This is basically France's Hardy Chicago or Celeste. You know, Celeste is popular in the south of the United States. Hardy Chicago is more of a northeast fig. This tree is their version of that. And it is definitely very hardy. There is some damage here on the tips, not a lot. Very, very minimal. This is, I would expect this to start leafing out rather soon. And I would not expect this, even though it did take some damage here on the 1-year-old wood. This will behave itself this year and fruit and not grow out of control and lignify better into next season. All right, now we're gonna take a look at the west side. This is definitely where the older trees are. They've not only been in the ground longer, but they also have they've survived the winter for a longer period of time, for many years now, and they've gotten themselves, I think, more lignified than pretty much any of the trees here on the property. One of which that's been in the ground for probably the longest and done the best, the longest, is this one here called Little Ruby. Different sections of the tree look better than others. Which makes you wonder, is it because of the lignification on different sections of that tree? Is it because maybe there's some vascular damage further down on some of the branches just due to time and prior winters? I don't know. But this branch here, in fact, is quite young. It's much younger, and I would have said not as lignified as the other branches, but yet this one here looks pretty good. So this actually is going against my theory of lignification. This branch over here looks pretty good, and I would argue this is on a much older branch than the other one, but a lot of the other ones here don't look very good. So I would say above average hardiness, but this winter it didn't really do as well as I would have liked it to. One of the varieties that I knew was not going to be very hardy, just because of a lot of reports over the years, is Ronde Bordeaux. Now, I've heard people say it is hardy, but not at the level of a lot of other varieties. So maybe it's above average. All of the 1-year-old wood on this is toasted. I don't think I see a single branch on here. Okay, that's a lie. I have a branch down here at the base that's not lignified. This is a sucker. This is a sucker. So this really does go against my theory of lignification. This branch, not only is it a sucker, it doesn't look very good. The wood is a lighter shade of brown, and that definitely puts a thorn in my side there when trying to get you guys to lignify your trees better. So there's probably something else going on. It's not just lignification. It's not just the variety that you choose. There's something else that I don't think we quite understand. Isn't that the beauty of nature and science? And, you know, if it was so easy to understand, I don't think I would be doing this. If it was all written down in a book somewhere, I wouldn't be doing this. If all the answers were already figured out, honestly, this is so fun for that reason, that we just don't know. You know what? This branch here looks pretty decent. It doesn't. So that one's toasted. Now, there is an interesting little thing that we did. Over here by the air conditioning units, I have a younger Ronde Bordeaux tree. And let's see if yeah. This branch here looks pristine, like nothing has happened to it. Now this tree didn't fruit for me last year. The other tree over there produced like 400 figs. This produced nothing. I don't think the lignification is really all that different than the other Ronde Bordeaux, yet there's definitely some wood in here, some 1-year-old wood that looks perfect or has very minimal amounts of damage. That to me is incredible. Again, don't know what's going on. Is it something in the soil? Is it maybe some winter damage from a prior year? I don't know. Now, without a doubt, before we move on a little bit more, this variety here, Moro de Caneva, is undoubtedly one of the most hardy varieties in existence. So far, I've had more luck with this than Hardy Chicago over time. There's definitely some damage here, but you can see that's leafing out. So a lot of this growth is toasted up here, but oddly enough, it's not desiccated. It's not breaking like that. This growth up here has. Interesting. But the majority of this tree looks untouched and pristine. I would say there's 5% of the tree took damage. And then if I show you more of the Moro de Caneva trees I have, that was Fico Seco for anyone that's interested. This is Nerino, and Nerino looks just as good. I would say about 5% of the growth. So this is Nerino, and there's actually some Breba swelling right now. This tree produced a ton of Breba last year. So this is not only a really hardy tree, but this will produce Breba even in really cold places. You know, sometimes I wonder, what am I doing? Why don't I just plant like a few hundred of this tree? So here's a really, really good surprise, is this JH Adriatic. Out of all the trees right here, we've got a Sultane, this is JH Adriatic, this is LSU Huye, and then back here is Texas BA1. That JH Adriatic in the middle is the only one among them that doesn't really have much brown growth on it. There's definitely some, but that's like a huge, huge win. Because not only is this tree hardy, but it's incredibly tasty. And if the more that this survives, being a late variety that it is, the less growth that gets killed, the earlier it's gonna fruit. And I've really been hoping that this tree would produce here around September 1st without winter dieback. With winter dieback, I may get very few fruits, none at all, or they might be like even ripening in October or early November, which is just at that point a little too late. Now here's actually a Celeste called Stallion that looks exceptional. You've got Breba buds on it, even though it's not gonna ripen these Breba buds, but they're swelling. The tips and the growth is swelling. So Stallion looks quite pristine. There's a section of the tree over here that's not as lignified that looks awful and got smashed. So that's one vote there, I guess, for the lignification thing. Over here, we have Safrari, which looks phenomenal as well. This is a really nice surprise. I know Bass, Trees of Joy, who had found this variety and introduced it, has claimed for years that it's quite hardy, and it definitely is. And you can see some Breba buds, which it does produce. It will ripen Brebas that are swelling. So that's a huge win because it is very similar to White Triana and A. Triano. I would not say they're the same by any means, and I think it's worth having both varieties. But White Triana for years, look at all the red growth on this that's just been smacked by the cold. I have multiple trees. This one here is right up against the house. You can't get any better than that. And it's definitely been smacked pretty hard. Now, some people are going to argue, oh, well, Ross, you got them on the west side. The west side of the property does so much better because that's where you get all your heat. The heat comes off the house. Well, you're going to tell me that like 10, 12, 14 feet away from the house where these branches are on the Moro de Caneva are getting that heat? I don't buy that. It's just too far away to get some of that residual heat. Another tree that looks really good, and I think there's almost no damage on it. There's a little bit here, actually. Excuse me. This is LSU Tiger. This undoubtedly has got to be up there with the hardier varieties I've got so far. And I'm saying so far because I expect others. Here's another Camuna tree leafing out. That looks really good. And then back here, we have a hardy Chicago by the name of Azores Dark. That looks pretty good. There is some damage on here, but you can see actually some Brebas are swelling. The growth is swelling. I don't expect this to produce any Breba, but yeah, that's a sign that at least some of the wood is alive. And then we've got Kufeji Black up here. This one I also would put up there so far from what I've seen from it as one of the hardier varieties in existence. It's leafing out. It looks really good. That one's from Hungary. It's very similar to Black Mission, but I think it's an improvement. And then we've got Green Michurinska, which a lot of the one-year-old wood here that wasn't lignified well that I preserved in pruning. I try to keep some of this lower growth that was not as thick, not as lignified, but I wanted to reduce the height of this tree. It was just getting out of control, and a lot of this took some damage. But even having said that, some of it looks pretty good. You can see that maroon color, and the further down you go, the more lignified it is, the better it looks. So I think there's probably a branch on here somewhere. I would expect to have some growth on it. Let's see if we can find that. Because this tree produced a ton of Breba. This tree produced more Breba than any variety last year, just due to the sheer size of it. And here we go. Here's some branches up here. I don't see any Breba buds just yet, but this is leafing out. Yep, there's a Breba bud there. So we're gonna get some Brebas on this, and I would consider this, again, one of the hardier varieties. One of the things I think is worth mentioning with this lignification thing, you know, I rivers pruned this Green Michurinska, meaning I pruned it in the summer. And when you prune the fig trees in the summer, they put out another flush of growth. And that flush of growth, a lot of times is not lignified. It just won't be lignified in time for the winter. And that's what I'm seeing a lot here on the tips of these trees. Because I did that, this tree has taken a lot of excessive damage. But what's cool is that the varieties you can do that on, Ronde Bordeaux is another one. I did it a lot on Moro de Caneva here, this Narino tree. The more the tips die back, or the more I prune and shorten these branches with my pruning shears, the more the growth is gonna show up. The later the fruits will potentially be. So this tree is really gonna explode in growth. It's not gonna be too out of control. It's not gonna be 7 to 10 feet in 1 year. this will be somewhere in the 3 to 4 feet range of growth. The JH Adriatic will probably be in the somewhere 1 to 2 feet range of growth. But if I get 3 to 4 feet of growth, that's more fruits. Every leaf will correspond to a fruit. And so we're basically playing with the hormones in the right balance by doing this on trees that can handle it. Allowing them to be pruned back more or hit by the winter more. Then they respond with a lot of growth. They put out more fruits. And not every variety can do that. As I said, JH Adriatic produces late. We don't want that to happen. Other varieties, if you do that to them, they're not going to fruit. A variety like Smith, if it doesn't have 0 dieback in my yard, it's not really going to fruit. Texas BA1, very unlikely that it'll fruit. All right, so now we're on the north side of the property, and Campaniere looks fantastic. These trees, I think, are a little bit further ahead than all the other trees on the property. I don't know why that is. Maybe it has something to do with the concrete here, the blacktop. Maybe that's warming up the roots a bit faster. This Campaniere, it looks like it's got a bunch of Breba buds on it. Even on this 1-year-old shoot here down here, that's a sucker. Not as lignified as I would have thought it would be. But some of the growth up here on the tree that's older, that 1-year-old wood that comes from older growth, is damaged quite significantly. So there's a pretty good mix of growth on here that looks pristine and growth that's taken lots of damage. Then you've got this Campaniere here that's much younger that looks totally pristine. Go figure. If I had the magic formula, that'd be great. But it seems like the older the trees get, the older the trunks get, and the more winters they survive, the less hardy they could potentially be. I think that's what I'm gathering right now. It's not just about lignification, it's about how old the trunks are as well. And I have a feeling it's just because over time, those trunks have taken some vascular damage. This is Floria, or Michurinska 10, in Bulgaria and parts of Eastern Europe. This is their go-to variety as the most hardy variety. This is their hardy Chicago, and it is exceptionally hardy. It is leafing out everywhere. It has a ton of Breba on it. It's one of the earliest varieties to ripen. This, to me, is not the tastiest fig in the world. I have it planted here in this drier soil. I think they actually taste pretty darn good planted here. If it's too waterlogged, I would say otherwise. However, just because it's an average tasting variety, you got to give it a lot of credit for how good this thing looks. If you're in these zone 6s and you're trying to plant a fig tree, this should be at the top of your list. And even though it's not the tastiest variety in the world, that doesn't matter, and I think that's one of the main messages I want to have you guys take away. That is your absolute priority when you're growing these fig trees in colder zones. 7A and below, I think that's got to be the top of the list. And then you start thinking about other things like flavor and taste and how well it does in humidity and rain. If it's not going to withstand the winter, what good is it? And I think a lot of the varieties in the southern plot, what are they going to do for me this year? Nothing. They're going to grow and I'm going to have a lot of cuttings again, but that's about it. Another tree here that looks pristine is St. Martin. And this tree hasn't fruited for me in this spot, but St. Martin's one of them varieties. Like Campaniere is supposed to survive -4 degrees Fahrenheit. St. Martin's supposed to have said to have survived -7 degrees Fahrenheit. I believe it. I'm putting my money on these varieties. I think Campaniere is obviously a hardy fig. It's more about the duration, as we discussed earlier in the video. If it's -4 for an hour and then goes up back to 10 very quickly, well, I don't think that's going to be a big deal. Just like if it's 130, well, your trees are going to get really stressed. But if you cool that back down to 80 or 90 rather quickly, they're going to be fine. And nothing happened to them. So it's the same thing. Is -7 going to be reproducible at longer durations? Probably not, but this is definitely one of the hardier varieties in existence. We also have another hardy Chicago here. This one's called, what is this one? Sicilian Dark or something like that. This one's actually surviving the winter pretty good. I think Azores Dark looks a little bit better, surprisingly. There is some winter damage on here and there. But hardy Chicago, no brainer. Then you've got Teramo, and Teramo is supposed to be a really hardy fig. Found in Maryland, but there's actually a pretty significant amount of damage on this, on the 1-year-old wood. And that's really disappointing because this is an incredible fig here. I love this variety. The more winter damage it takes, the later the fruits are gonna be. And the quality will probably drop pretty significantly on this year. So that's something to keep an eye on. We'll see how the quality turns out, but I think all the 1-year-old wood on this is dead. That's really, really surprising. Actually, there's a sucker down here that looks pretty good. There's a sucker down there at the base that looks really good. So something's happened, and we'll see how far down on the 2-year-old wood and the 3-year-old wood it could potentially go, which is kind of a bummer, but hey, that's a really good list. And just because I'm having the experience here with Teramo, as I said before, doesn't mean that's going to happen all the time, every year. You got to have multiple trees in multiple locations. Let's see what the soil test says. Man, we don't have all the answers, but there's always something left to learn. I thank you guys here for watching this one. Please hit the like button for me if you haven't. Hit the subscribe button. This is, this is some good information that I think a lot of people can be greatly helped by. And I don't have to do this. So just hit the like button just for that. Just for sharing some good info. See you for the next one. All right, guys? Take care.